Release date, August 16th, 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of TBD CFB with your hosts. I'm Mason.
And I'm Joey.
And I'm Isaac.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about the preseason again. But instead of taking a look at a specific conference, we're actually going to be taking a look at college football as a whole. We're going to be talking about the 12-team playoff, the AP Top 25 release, the preseason release, and we're going to talk about some teams that really need to step it up this year. If this is your first time listening to the show, we're just three guys that love Jesus and love talking about college football, and we're going to get into it today, starting with our hot take question. Here it is. And if you have any opinions on this hot take question, please leave them in the comments of this video. The question is, should the group of five be in its own league and have its own playoff? Some facts for you, some straight-up facts for you. The group of five has 61 schools. The Power Four has 72, including the two teams that left the Pac-12 and the three independent schools. So they make up just under half of the entirety of the FBS. The only group of five team to ever make the 14 playoff was Cincinnati, and they lost. They didn't even score a touchdown against Alabama, and they probably, this is more of opinion, but they probably also would have gotten blasted by Michigan and Georgia as well. So, guys, is it really fair? Will these schools actually get a fair shot at the playoffs as we expand into 12 teams? Or should they have their own league and their own playoff? Joey, what do you think?
I mean, I think that in a sense it's a fair opinion to have. I think it would be kind of cool to see a playoff system in order to see who could make it to this 12-team playoff to face off against these, Power Four schools. But, we haven't seen how the 12-team playoff is really going to work quite yet. We haven't seen it, period. And so until we see this first year, we're never really going to have a true opinion on it. I think right now we're good where we're at. But I think that, if this year, if a group of five team is in there and, it's clearly just not evenly matched and, there's another group of five team who should have been there, then we got to, kind of evaluate and assess. Maybe there needs to be a different system to how we determine which group of five team really gets in there. But until we see how this 12-team playoff works, I don't think there's any way of us saying this is what we need to be doing, this is what we shouldn't be doing. We need at least 1 year to evaluate and assess.
So this was a difficult question, honestly, because I haven't thought much about it. I've just kind of assumed, hey, put the guys in there and give them a shot to hang with the big dogs. But then as Joey talked, I thought about Liberty and Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl last year. And Liberty was, I would consider to be one of the premier group of five schools last season. They had a great team. Coach Chadfield did really well. I mean, they really put a good program out in Lynchburg. And listen, they hung with Oregon for like one half of the game. And then from there, it kind of went awry. So I'm kind of with Joey on this one. I think that you give them a year, give them a shot, because all you've got to do is be 12th. If you're 13th, you're out of luck. But if all you've got to do is be 12th, you have a chance to hang with the big guys. But there again, you have to consider even the best FCS school like North Dakota State is going to probably get throttled by Bama, or, well, at least Saban's Bama, or Georgia, or, pre-COVID Clemson even. So it's like, what's the status of the lesser schools? And so it'll be interesting to see. I'm excited to see how it plays out. But we gotta give it at least 1 year, maybe two, a trial run, and we'll see what happens. But I think it's going to be interesting.
I also want to say, group of five teams, you got it. Sorry, Mason, I know you're about to speak, but you got to acknowledge, like you said, Liberty. You have an App State team who has a history of beating Power Four schools, and those Power Four schools were teams who were contenders for the national championship at the time. You got Coastal Carolina, which I don't think they're going to be that great this year, but they have history of being good. And you also have a team like JMU. JMU being that team where they almost got gypped out of a bowl game, but they were a really good team in every sport, really. But you just gotta consider things like that.
So the big thing that I really wanted to point out from my stats that I mentioned earlier, the big one that really jumped out at me is that the Power Four has 72 schools and the Group of Five has 61. So you're still talking about 72 schools versus 62, making the college football playoff. And most of that 72, they're going to beat up on these group of 5 schools, no matter who you are, And yes, App State, they have a history of going and beating Power 4 schools, but how many times has App State made the playoff? How many times has a group of 5 team made the playoff? So even with auto bid, and we're going to get into that in a second, one group of 5 school will definitely make the playoff. But what is the likelihood of, one, more than one group of 5 team actually making the playoff, and two, a group of 5 team actually getting past the first round? I mean, you're talking about 11 of the other best Power 4 schools in the country, and you're telling me that one group of 5 schools is going to be able to get past one of them? I don't know. I think it would be cool, and I honestly think it would be good for the sport of college football to have the group of 5 in its own league. Now, would that cost more money, and would, they have to find more funding? Absolutely. But I think it would be cool because then you would have like another playoff system. Now, how many people watch the FCS playoffs? I mean, I watched a couple games last year maybe, but having the FBS in its own league and all these other schools, and then when we have conference realignment, if they want to pull up a school, if they get good enough, we've seen UCF and BYU became a non-independent and joined the Big 12. We see these schools come up, and Houston and SMU, and now they're Power 4, and we could see that happen. But to me, I think that they should have their own league. I think that, we are giving it a trial run with the 12-team playoff, and we'll definitely have at least one group of 5 school. But are we really doing justice by the group of 5 schools, or are we just using them as like punching bags?
I feel like, too, real quick, is like when it comes to group of 5 and Power 4, we got to remember that conferences aren't necessarily Power 4 and group of 5 when it comes to other sports. So having this separate system also affects the other sports, bringing in athletes, students that provide, the funding for different kinds of events like this, other events, sporting events and all. I mean, you got Coastal Carolina, who came close to making the playoffs. Granted, yes, it was 2020, so, some of us don't consider that year to be a very great year of college football, especially if you're not an Ohio State fan. And you've had plenty of teams make a push. I'm pretty sure App State that same year had made a push. BYU, even though they were independent at the time, they had made a push with Zach Wilson at quarterback, which nowadays seems crazy. But, there are teams that are good enough to make it. It's just a matter of, because they're in this group of 5 section, maybe they weren't given the opportunity. Now, the team that was given the opportunity kind of blew it. We can all admit that. Cincinnati blew it with their opportunity to show that group of 5 is there and that they can compete. But, there's different kinds of speculation. But again, I think we have to see this first year of the 12-team playoff. Then we can go and say, you know what, maybe we need to do this differently. I think it would be cool to have a separate playoff system, but I still think they should have an opportunity to play against the Power 4 because they're not FCS versus FBS. It's still FBS versus FBS. It's just a matter of smaller FBS versus bigger FBS.
That was going to be my next thought, is what you're going to do with that, Joey, is if it was a separate system per se, you're going to get into dividing FBS, right? FBS 1 versus FBS 2. And while it may prove to be necessary, you're essentially creating 3 levels of Division 1 college football. So, and with super conferences, that may end up being a whole other thing. So, but really interesting thought.
My last point, though, is just that I feel that there is a lack of representation for the group of 5 teams. And I just feel like we're going to pick next week who is going to be that one, at least one group of 5 team that each of us thinks is going to get into the playoffs because of the auto bid when we pick our conference championship winners for 2024 next week. However, I really just, my biggest issue with it is that I just feel like there's not representation. And like I was talking to one of my friends and I was telling him, even if Kirby Smart went to a school like Kennesaw State, they're not going to make a playoff ever. Like, this is not college football 25 dynasty. This is not NCAA college football. This is real life. You're not going to get recruits to come to Kennesaw State. Now, I mean, maybe if Kirby Smart went there, or even Nick Saban or Urban Meyer, whoever, but maybe they could, but it would take a long, long time. So my thing is that I'm just worried about the lack of representation of these smaller schools that probably will never get to the level of the Power Four. So speaking of the 12-team playoff, now we're going to talk about the 12-team playoff. So for the last, and it's been a long 10 years, we've had a 4-team college football playoff. And the biggest argument is, well, how can you only have a playoff with 4 teams? And I think a lot of us were really feeling that, well, show me where there's more than 4 teams that deserve to be in the playoff. And at first, you really couldn't. Maybe there was a money deal floating around with ESPN and the college football playoff. That's besides the point. In the last couple of years, and especially last year, right, you had at least 4 teams, because you could argue Florida State and Georgia, and Florida State even without Jordan Travis, because they went undefeated and won their conference championship, still technically deserved and did the work to get into the college football playoff. So now we've actually reached a point where, hey, we need a bigger playoff system. So we're going to have 12 teams. We're going to have the Power 4 conference championship winners, which would be SEC, ACC, Big 12, and Big 10. Those winners get an automatic first-round bye. They'll be seeded 1 through 4. Everybody else will be seeded 5 through 12. We're going to talk a little bit more about the auto bid in a second, but that's where we're at in college football.
I think there's both pros and cons to it. I think that definitely it's good to see more teams being represented. And, again, this is a system that includes the group of 5. Definitely. There's no, people being left out or anything like that. And, all conference champions are included, which has been a huge controversy as well, because, you have, I can't think of a moment exactly, but say you have a Michigan who has too many losses, but, they beat a really good team in Ohio State and they win their conference, right? Okay, cool. That's a great win. Maybe you have what it takes. But here comes the cons. You also have, and we're going to get into automatic bids, but you also have a group of 5 school and a possibility of a team like Michigan, who has had a bad year, but has one great year, somehow gets into the conference championship and wins that game. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, we got some rough teams involved. Another aspect I got to look at is, a big issue with football is there's some pretty serious injuries. And a lot of the serious injuries occur because they've been playing a lot. There's a lot of contact involved. And I know there's a bunch of rules and being implemented and stuff like that, but players can get hurt. And some of these are career-ending injuries. So you're extending the season, or we'll even say the postseason. You're creating a larger likelihood of some serious injuries.
Only really by a week, if you think about it. Now, well, maybe not only by a week, because you are starting the playoffs earlier, because something I forgot to mention is that the first round takes place at the higher seeded team's home school. So, like, let's say you had number 5 Georgia versus number 12 Ole Miss. Well, then you'd be playing at Georgia. But the national championship is a week later or 2 weeks later than it would normally be, but there's a bye week in between that middle now. So I think it happens around January 20th, which is still a Monday, nobody wants to watch college football on a Monday. But that's just I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, if you really think about it, though, it's not about, the time frame, how many more days it is. It's about how many more games it is. And it's more games. And for a lot of players,
right.
It's a lot more games. A lot of these players have never experienced the playoffs, right? So they're extending their season by 3-4 games. So,
But this does prepare them more for the NFL, who plays 18 regular season games. Because this will be around 16 regular season games.
Right. If you run the table, you go 16-0 under the new format.
Right. And then plus, in the NFL, you play 18 regular season games, and then you play the postseason games. So I think that this is also, again, I'm just pointing out, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, because you're right. More games equals more injuries. We see this in the NFL all the time. But I would say that this longer season does prepare you better for a league like the NFL.
Well, and don't get me wrong, I like the idea of the 12-team playoff. There's just some things that are, again, within this first year of not knowing how it's going to turn out, there are a lot of things that can happen and could turn out to show that it's a bad idea. I mean, but we really can't say anything until we see it firsthand. I like the idea. I just think there's a lot of things that could happen and, could mess things up a little bit.
The challenge is this. I think 12 could be too many. I was an advocate personally for 6, going 6 and then maybe 8. Because when you get outside the top 8, I think you start to welcome in, like we mentioned, a group of 5 school. And I'm not saying you should exclude group of 5 from the top 8, but from a general sense, once you're outside the top 8, Now, that said, hopefully this 12-team format will prevent like a 2016 situation. And I reference this probably till the day I leave this earth. You had Penn State, who beat Ohio State, won the conference, didn't get into the playoff. And again, I know the committee said, well, the quality loss, or the non-quality loss rather, to Iowa hurt them. I'll be honest, I don't care, because you won the conference. You took down the beast who had ran the conference and were just national champions 2 years prior. Nonetheless, I think a 12-team format will eliminate that. The challenge is that every year since then, it's always been, well, now we don't have enough. And because then we have the Ohio State deal 8 years ago. And then we have this past season last season, I guess you should say, where Florida State got left out. And my personal opinion is you can't necessarily leave out an undefeated Power 5 champion, but at the same time, the whole body of work has to be considered. And I think that's where the disconnect is. I think 12 teams will probably prove to be beneficial, but I think that at first glance, starting off, going from 4 to 12, I think is a very big jump. And to your point, Joey, it does add several games to the season potentially. Like if you have, let's say, a number 12th seeded Liberty. I think last season Liberty finished in the top 12 or 13 in the rankings. I believe they were 12th.
Well, no, they were around 13th.
Okay.
But in the new system, and I'm going to mention this in a second, they would have been 12 because they were the only undefeated Group of 5 school, and they won the Conference USA.
Okay, fair enough. So they were, for all intents and purposes, top 12. Those guys are used to playing 14 games at most.
For a non-conference winner, you're adding 2 games. Or for a non-conference winner or a Group of 5 school, you're adding 2 games to the normal, like what would be playoffs. Well, actually, no, 1 game, because normally you'd have to go 15-0 because you'd have to win a playoff. You have to win a conference championship, usually a playoff game, and then the national championship. That would put you at 3 extra games past the regular season. Now we're going to have 4. So you're really only adding 1 game.
Well, that's assuming that you ran the table. Now, if you weren't a conference winner, you play 12. You have conference championship week off, and then you have potentially 1, 2, 3, 4 playoff games. So potentially, if you're not a conference winner, if you're, say, the bottom third, you're probably going to be adding potentially 4 games. Now, if you're bottom third, you're probably not going to make the finals. But there again, with football, it's different because March Madness is this way. March Madness, you have the 12 plays the 5. That's always a good matchup. The 6 and the 11, the 7 and the 10, the 8 and the 9, all of the underdog matchups are always sublime. Just truthfully, they're wonderful. But football's different because Liberty would admittedly get throttled by Alabama. That's why I think that 12 is too much at first glance, but I think it's going to be a good format, and I'm very excited to see how it plays out.
So for me personally, I have a few opinions. Personally, I love the 12-team playoff format. I think that it's honestly the perfect amount. I think 16 would be too much. I like 12 because every single team who deserves to have a shot at the playoffs will get to have a shot. And, I'm about to talk about auto bids, but I really like that the Group of 5 gets at least 1 school in there. Now, there are some cons to it. For instance, like last year, Oklahoma, I think, went 9-3, did not make the conference championship, but was at number 12. In this new format, because of the auto bid, Liberty would have made the top 12, knocking out Oklahoma. They would have got the 12th spot automatically because they were ranked somewhere between 20 and 25. They would have jumped from 20 and 25 to number 12 and made the playoff. They would have been the 12 seed. They would have knocked Oklahoma out. So you have to ask yourself, who is more deserving of that spot? 9-3 Oklahoma or an undefeated Group of 5? You have
9-3 Oklahoma.
Exactly, right? So because you have a Power 4 now school who has played way better teams, and you have Liberty who has played in Conference USA against teams like FIU and Kennesaw State making the playoff. That's what I don't agree with. And now you're going to have teams who, can make the playoffs with 3 losses. And that's something else, too, I like about the new playoff format, is you've seen teams freak out after getting 1 loss early season and knowing that if they get 1 more loss, even in the conference championship, if they make it that far, they're out of the playoffs. Now you can get 3 losses. Heck, you can even get possibly 4 if your losses are quality enough. Like, let's say you're 9-3 Oklahoma. You make the conference championship somehow. You lose. You were still in the conference championship. Because what I was going to say, because this is kind of another con, though. I'm going back and forth here, but this is kind of another con, is that you're pretty much going to have 2 schools from every single conference make the playoff of the Power 4. Because pretty much every 2 teams, my guess, every 2 teams in that conference championship and those Power 4 schools are going to make the playoffs if their records are both somewhere between, 0 to 3 losses. That's just my opinion. So let's get into this auto bid thing. What I wrote in the notes was, does it suck? Yes, it freaking does. So the auto bid makes it that the Power 4 conference champions and 1 Group of 5 team automatically make the playoffs. Top 4 get first round buys. The Group of 5 gets ranked somewhere based on their actual record and next to other teams somewhere between 5 and 12. So, for example, 2 years ago, 2022, you have 12-0 Georgia and 9-3 LSU in the SEC championship. Let's just say they were doing 12 teams that year, and let's say that LSU ended up winning. LSU would get a first-round bye, and Georgia would not. So you're telling me the 9-3 LSU team should still be ranked higher than the 12-1 Georgia? No. But even last year, let's look last year, right? Purdue versus Michigan in the Big Ten. Joey mentioned this earlier. What if that 8-4 Purdue team beat Michigan? They would have gotten in. You can have a team in the Big 12 and the Big 10 or the SEC or the ACC with 2 conference losses and maybe 2 regular season losses out of conference losses, win the Big 12 championship or the Big 10 championship or the SEC championship, and get a first-round bye. It's ridiculous. Now, it's not likely that it's going to happen, but it's the principle of the fact that it definitely could. I think it should still be based on eye test and record. I think that's still how they're not ranking based on merit. Yes, winning the SEC championship or winning your conference championship is a huge deal. It's a thing to be celebrated. But does it really hold that much weight that you're going to be able to get a first-round bye in the college football playoff? What do you guys think? Am I crazy?
I think what you mentioned a while ago is really worthwhile because what you're going to do is you run the risk of dismissing the whole body of work conversation I mentioned a while ago. And like you said, you're going to have a team like Liberty who was like, say, 23rd, essentially double in standing like that. I think the auto bid, I think it's a cool thought for like March Madness where basketball really can go either way. But in football, where it's much more strenuous, it's much more spread out in terms of its actual level of competition, I think it kind of undermines the whole idea because you could have, to your point, Mason, you could have let's say Oklahoma comes in, or let's talk about Texas. We talk about Oklahoma a lot. Let's talk about Texas. Let's say horns down. They come into the SEC, they do well. They finish at 10-2. They lose in Atlanta to, say, Georgia. I hope Texas doesn't make it, but let's just say they do. You come in and lose to Georgia, you're 10-3, and you have, Tulane from the American, who is, 18th, and they jump that body of work. I don't know, man. I don't really like it. The more we talk about it, the more I'm growing disdain for it. Don't get me wrong. I think it's cool for a program like Tulane or Liberty or pick your Group of 5 school to hang on their resume. Like Cincinnati's like, we're the only ones who've made it. Look at us. Congratulations. Here's your participation trophy. The fact of the matter is you're going to jump a team who's more deserving and probably get throttled. Yeah, not a fan.
I don't know how to feel about it. I feel like in a sense, I can understand where it comes from. I mean, you look at the NFL, they have, first buy, they got first round buys and stuff like that. And they were kind of trying to resemble that in a sense. I think that with 12 teams and, with so many conferences, it doesn't work out that way. So there's that one thing. Another thing is, I feel personally that, the first round bye should go to the top 4 teams in the rankings, 1, 2, 3, 4, even, and,
like Kirk Herbstreit always says, it's about the best 4 teams.
Exactly. So like 1, 2, 3, 4 should get the first round buys. If you're going to get 4 teams the first round bye, 1, 2, 3, 4. The rest, figure it out on your own. I do not care. I don't think necessarily conference champions should also really get a first round bye. It's hard for me to say that because, no matter what, in a Power 4 conference, it's hard to win your conference. And when you do it, it's awesome. I would know because Clemson's done it plenty of times. But it just makes that first round bye part so much more difficult to really understand and get behind. It's about the best teams and the best group of 5 school. I'm okay with the automatic bid for group of 5. I think they should have representation. And you know what? If they get throttled, they get throttled and we'll learn from it and whatever. But I feel like group of 5 should have some representation, which is fair. And, you say you see a Liberty team who has a chance of putting up a good game, a good fight, and possibly a win, then there you go. So automatic there, fine. But conference champions, it gets iffy for me. I think you should have the best, I guess technically top 11 teams since you got that one automatic bid for group of 5. It's just how I feel it should work. It makes more sense, and not always is the conference champion the best team, right? So why would they get the best slot in the playoffs?
Yeah, and something else to look at too, because I feel like a lot of this is just tying back into that idea, like should the group of 5 have their own league? Because now what we're going to talk about is the AP Top 25, which released on Monday. So just to start off, because we're tying everything back into that, there is not a single group of 5 team in the top 25. And that's really telling. And I get it, it's preseason, okay? And something else about these preseason rankings, TBD CFB does not do a preseason ranking. We used to, and then we started thinking about it. What are we really basing these rankings on? Their off-season recruiting, their talent, their eye test based in spring camp and fall camp. Where does that happen on a football field versus other teams in their conference and in the sphere of college football? It doesn't. So we don't really agree with the preseason, but of course it's here, and we definitely have some disagreements. Obviously some things that, look pretty good. They got it right. Voters got it right. But also some things that were just like, And we get it, writers got it right, and, we got to have something to look forward to, and we got to rank them somehow. But we don't release our rankings, which we do a top 12. We don't do a top 25, we do a top 12, but we don't release our rankings until after week 1. And we base it on how they look, on who they played, what that strength of game looked like. And some people disagree with it because it's almost nothing like the AP Top 25 looks. But we like to do it that way because we want the teams that we think looked the best from week to week. So you'll see ours after week 1. Who do we think, guys? Too high, too low? Hit me with it.
Let me start here. Number 5 and number 7. And honestly, number 8. Kind of a sham. Bama, Notre Dame, and Penn State. Listen, I don't like Bama. You can say I'm biased. It is what it is. The fact is, Kalen DeBoer hasn't coached it down. Alabama has lost. Listen, they still got Jalen Milroe. Congratulations. He didn't win the Heisman. I'm just saying. But here's the reality. He hasn't coached it down. Alabama has lost several players. Again, they're going to have some of Saban's coattails there. He's going to be an advisor to the program. Let's not pretend he's not there. But he's not on the field, and it's not his team anymore. Bama is too high. Notre Dame is consistently ranked in the top 10. I don't really like it. Marcus Freeman's a good coach. I think they've got a shot. Riley Leonard could prove to be a difference maker in South Bend. I don't think he's all that great, but it's just my opinion. He played for Duke. Duke football, one good year. Duke's a basketball school, okay? And they're pretty good at baseball, but they're a basketball school. Last but not least, Penn State. I like James Franklin. Still crazy to think he coached at Vandy. I like Penn State. It's one of my bucket list items to go to a game at Beaver. But consistently, they play against the big dogs, i.e., Michigan and Ohio State. And pretty much every year, they have 2 losses on their conference record, and it's always to those guys. So if you want my opinion, those 3, I don't think should be ranked quite as high. I think all 3 of them are top 12, but I don't think Bama's top 5. Penn State, I could probably see at number 10, and Notre Dame, top 12, I could see it, but the top 7, I'm not really with it.
So I think from 16 to 25, and you can probably see it on the screen right here, you could probably take any of these teams and put them anywhere. I mean, I think Oklahoma might be a little too low, especially with them being in the SEC this year. Oklahoma State has Ollie Gordon, obviously the number 1 player in the country, but the rest of their team might be a little Texas A&M probably a little too high. Kansas I can see. USC, NC State. I'm not surprised that Iowa's at 25. They usually come in early at the preseason. They'll probably be out by like week 5 or 6. So no, I'm just kidding, but maybe. It's really 1 through 10. Isaac, I'm gonna disagree with you. I think that Alabama's right where they should be. I would probably switch Oregon and Texas. I think that Oregon is ranked a little too high. Georgia, Ohio State, right where they should be. Ole Miss, they also might be a little too high. There's a lot of Jackson Dart hype out there. We'll see. We'll really see on that one. I'm not sure about that. Pretty much everybody else, I think, is interchangeable. It was a little surprised to see Clemson at 14, but I guess they're poised to have a good year. Something that I was talking about today when it comes to Clemson, because me and Joey are going to that game. It'll be fun. The only person who is going to really lose that game, if they lose it, is Georgia. Clemson needs a staple win. They do. However, if they lose, it was Kirby Smart, man. It was bound to happen. Crazy recruiting classes. Great guys. Coach has had 3 undefeated seasons. The only team to beat Georgia since 2020, not named Alabama, is Florida in 2020. There's nobody that's beaten Georgia named Alabama since 2020. But if Georgia loses, you lost to the guy who doesn't even use the transfer portal. You lost to the guy who hasn't been in the playoffs since 2020. You lost to a team whose offensive line has been dog water the last 4 years. So Clemson needs the win for the perception of their school, but again, the person who's really going to lose the perception of the general public if they lose this game is Georgia. If we lose to the number 14th ranked team in week 1, it's going to be rough. We're going to fall far. Probably not out of the top 10, but we're still going to fall far. But everybody else, I think, is pretty interchangeable. Again, it's preseason, so it's going to be it's really hard to tell. Yeah, it's just hard to tell for me. Some of these teams pretty interchangeable. Like I said, 16 through 25, top 10, obviously. I think they got it right for the most part. I think I would flip Oregon and Texas. I think I would drop Michigan lower. Missouri's right where they should be. I think Utah's right where they should be. Tennessee, again. There's a lot of SEC and Big Ten schools in here. Talked about that favor earlier with the 12-team playoff, but we'll see what happens. What do you think, Joey?
First off, I'm going to go ahead and say I think Georgia should not be number 1. I think that off-the-field issues that are occurring can be a pretty big problem. And they've happened quite a bit this summer. I still think they're top 2. I just don't think they're the better one of the top 2. I think Ohio State should flip with Georgia. I kind of like...
It's okay. We can all be wrong sometimes.
I kind of like the Oregon-Texas position. I think Texas is a great program. I just think that when it comes to Oregon, their defense is just that much better. And they always have great talent on offense. So really it just comes down to that defense. Alabama, I think, is at the right position. We don't know where they're at, so 5 right in the middle of that top 10 is okay for now for me personally. Ole Miss, at first I thought they were too low, but then I got thinking. They lost a big weapon in Judkins, and I don't know right now how they will adjust with that, if they have somebody in place for them, how their offense is going to run without that big name at running back to where you have to worry about the run game as well. And their defense is just never good. Notre Dame, typical. Penn State, typical. Do I think they should be there? No. Am I surprised? No. Michigan, I think they should be outside the top 10. I think Florida State should be above them. You know what? I'll put them at 10, actually. Florida State being above them. Missouri, I'm concerned about. I think they had one good fluke year, but we'll see. There's a lot of question marks around Missouri right now. I think they're too high right now. Utah, still question marks around them. Can freaking Cam Rising stay healthy?
I was about to say, they will have Cam Rising back, though.
Yeah, and I mean, they're in the same boat as Iowa, really. Their defense is carrying right now. And Iowa's at 25. So what's putting, other than Cam Rising, what is putting Utah so high?
Cam
LSU?
Rising.
Yeah, exactly. LSU, good. Clemson, really, like you said, 16 down is, whatever. I don't think a lot of the teams are going to be there after, the first, 4 weeks. But yeah, I think down to Clemson, maybe even Tennessee. Down to Tennessee is where it's like, there's, for me, a lot of question marks. I don't know where you get that number for this team. But yeah.
Well, I think that'll just about do it for this show. We have some really interesting things going on in college football this year, some really new additions. These new Power 4 conferences conference expansion is here, and it's big. Next week, we're going to be talking about those Power 4 conferences. We're going to pick our conference championship winners. We're going to pick the playoffs. We're going to pick who we think is going to win the freaking national championship. You don't want to miss it. Be here next week.
And always remember,
no matter what team you pull for, if you're on God's side, you're always on the winning team. Jesus came into the world to die and save sinners. And us here at TBD CFB, we all believe in him. And if you don't have him, you need him. And John 3:16 tells us that whoever believes shall have eternal life, because God sent his only begotten Son to enable those things. John 6:47 says that he who believes has eternal life. And Romans 5:8 says that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So take comfort in that. Repent and believe the gospel.
And if you ever need anything, prayer for anything, because we do prayer for our followers, drop a comment on this YouTube video. Hit us up on Instagram DM. We want to pray for you guys. We want to love on you guys. And we just thank you so much for listening. I'm Mason.
I'm Joey.
And I'm Isaac.
This has been TBD CFB.
Bye-bye.
Later.